Welcome back. Yesterday, we asked the question, does Christianity have any resources for people who are going through suffering? Does Christianity offer a particular perspective on suffering that would give people like us hope? We live in a world in which suffering is commonplace, a broken, fallen world where things are not the way they are supposed to be. Suffering is the norm in so many situations. So if we're going to live a life of meaning and purpose, if we're going to live a life of joy, we're going to have to come to some answers about suffering. We're going to have to get God's perspective, a biblical perspective on it. If you had a chance to read John chapter 9 ahead of time, great. If not, no worries. We're going to start in at John chapter 9, verse 1. Jesus has just left the temple with his disciples. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, you see how the disciples are thinking. They believe that this man's blindness is caused either by his sin or his parents' sin. This is a question that they asked a lot in the first century. It's a question that people have asked over and over. Why do bad things happen to people? It was pretty common for the disciples to encounter someone who was sitting on the side of the road with a disability or maybe with a serious sickness. They didn't have all the resources that we have today, and therefore, when they saw this man sitting there, they thought this is their chance to kind of get some clarity from Jesus. Who sinned that this man was born blind? They want to blame someone for his blindness, and they're just not sure who it is to blame. This is the same kind of thinking you see in the book of Job. Job is a much older book, and yet the same kind of thinking persists. Job's friends, they believe that if someone lives a good life, good things will happen to him. And if they have bad things happen in their life, that must be evidence that they have done some things wrong. And so they keep trying to get Job to confess some serious, dark, hidden sin so that they can make sense out of his suffering. See, this desire to blame someone or something for our suffering, I think it's rooted in a desire to control our world. We want to believe that good things happen to good people. We want to believe that if you make foolish choices, then sure, you might suffer. But people who live good lives, people who are responsible, they won't suffer like this. It's a desire for us to stay in control and to say that suffering happens to other people, poor people, bad people, foolish people, whatever it is. But if we can just do the right things, if we can behave the right way, then suffering won't come into our life. When I was young, about 10, 12 years old, something like that, my grandfather had a massive stroke. My grandmother lived and took care of him for, I think it was about 20 years until he died of prostate cancer. As he was nearing his death, people in my family said things like, it will be good for my grandmother to be able to get out and do some things that she hadn't been able to do for the last 20 years as she took care of his every need. She had been incredibly sacrificial. She had been incredibly generous. She had loved him, kept her vows to him, taken care of him in every detail of life. She had made his life as best as it possibly could be, even at the cost of her own comfort. So now, after he had died, she was going to get some time to do some basic things to enjoy a last few years of her own life. But it wasn't long after he died that she was diagnosed with cancer herself, and she died. And it would be easy to wonder, that's not fair, right? I mean, it would be easy to say, God let her down. Look at all the good things that she had done. And did she deserve this? Did she deserve this kind of suffering? See, it's that rooted in that same idea that if we do the right things and are good people, then suffering shouldn't come to us. Suffering should only come to bad people. That's what the disciples believed. That's why they asked Jesus, Who caused this man's blindness? Who sinned, him or his parents? I knew a woman years ago who were friends with Christine and I, who was a young mother who's serving God, doing amazing things. And she came down with cancer. People came to her and told her that if she would have faith, enough faith, that she would be cured. And that her kind of getting worse and worse before she actually died of the cancer, well, it was a sign that she didn't have enough faith. Do you hear the disciples thinking again? Looking for someone to blame. She didn't have enough faith. It's her fault that suffering came into her life. It's her fault that she died. We have this desire to stay in control. We have this desire to blame someone. But suffering comes to all people. Suffering comes oftentimes without any sort of explanation, at least not from a human perspective. Suffering causes us to realize that we are not in control, that we don't have all the answers. Suffering causes us to surrender our life to God, to surrender our will to His will, to say, God, you know best, to say, God, my future is in your hands. I will trust you. I will submit to you. I will love you. I don't need all the answers. I don't have to always know why. And that's good because God never really gives us an answer to our why questions. God gives us something better than an answer. And God gives us a person, Jesus, who entered into our world, Jesus, who endured great suffering, Jesus, who loves us, Jesus, who's with us, Jesus, who will never leave us or forsake us. If we had an answer, we'd argue with it. And what answer could possibly be good enough that it would cause us to say, oh, okay, I get it now. I'm good with all the suffering in this world? No answer can do that. Jesus gives us something so much better. He gives us a relationship with Himself, our God, who suffered with us and for us. Thanks for joining us today. See you tomorrow.